If you want to follow along, I recommend this dbfiddle website. It's a free website and you don't even need to create an account. When you open the website, just click on SQL Server, that's the flavour of SQL that we're using for these videos, and make sure you choose AdventureWorks as the database. That will give you access to all of the same sample data that I'm using in these videos.
We're going to talk about how to create pivot tables in SQL today. What does this mean? Well, in the last video, we showed how we can aggregate our data using the aggregate functions and the group by special words, the group by clause, but we saw that we didn't get subtotals or grand totals when we used that. Today, we're going to cover how we can modify our group by statements so that we can get the subtotals and the grand totals just like we can in a typical Excel pivot table. To get us started, I've got more or less the same pivot table that we used in the last video. This time, rather than split the Excel version by year and month, I've just got one column, order year month, which is very similar to the SQL version that we had last time. But it's still grouping by the order month, the order year and month, the online order flag, and summing up the total due value. And it's only doing this for months in 2013. So first step, let's recreate this in SQL. We did this last time, so we're just going to blast through it nice and fast. But let's work up in steps. We're using the sales file and the sales order header table. So it's sales.sales order header. Let's run this just to make sure that we can open it. We sure can. Now we are interested in the sales whose order date is in 2013. So we want to use the year function on the order date and keep only those that are 2013. We'll run this just to make sure it looks okay. Sure does. Now the information that we want to convert the order date into order year month. We want the online order flag and we want the total due. So let's get the three of those. Do you remember how to convert order date into this format? We use the format function on, let's do on order date. And the format that we want to specify is year, then month. Remember, month has to have capital M's in SQL. We'll call this order year month. We want the online order flag. Before we do any aggregation, let's just check that the three columns like this look okay. They sure do. Looks good to me. So now we want to aggregate this. We want to sum the total due. We'll call this sum total due. And since we've now got some aggregation going on, we're going to need the group by as well. In this case, we're grouping by these two columns. So we need to whack them back in. Unfortunately, in SQL Server, we can't just reuse the name from the select statement. We can't just whack that in, unfortunately. We do need to redo the calculation or rewrite the calculation. It is what it is, but here we go. Now I've got my updated aggregation. Let's give it a run to see what we get. Cool, this is looking better, but the order's slightly misaligned to the Excel version. So let's also whack in an order by just for good measure. Here we go. Now this is looking just like it is on the left. We've just recreated the pivot table on the left with the SQL on the right. Easy peasy. The pivot table on the left doesn't have the subtotals and the grand totals yet. We took them off just so that we could make a nice clean comparison between this one and the SQL output. But let's put them back in now. So I'm just going to go into the pivot table settings. I'm going to put on the grand total for the columns and we're going to show the subtotals on the bottom. So now the subtotals are the sum of the individual online order flags for that particular year month. And then finally, the grand total is the sum of everything. So can we get this with SQL as well? Of course we can. What we're going to do is we're going to modify the group by statement. The way that we modify it is by adding ROLLUP after it and then specifying our columns in brackets. So that's two things. We add rollup and we also add brackets. Let's give this a run to see what we get. Here we go. So we are getting something similar. Just for right now, I'm going to take out the order by, because one of the nice things about the rollup is that it actually leaves our data in a nice order for us. So the default output for the rollup is going to look like this, at least in SQL Server. We have our low-level aggregations, but we also have the subtotal, which matches the one in Excel. Again, we've got the low-level ones for each combination of online order flag and order year month for February 2013. We also have the grand total, the subtotal. If we go all the way to the bottom, we also have a grand total, which matches the Excel version. And the way that we know whether something is a subtotal or a grand total in SQL, is just by checking where these nulls are. But it was very easy to add this rollup statement in, and suddenly we have the subtotals and the grand totals that we care about. And it's just like Excel. What I mean by that is we get subtotals for the year month in each after each individual combination, but we're not seeing any subtotals for the online order flag by itself. So we really are just matching the Excel pivot table in that respect. Now, one point I want to make really, really clear is that we're matching the pivot table on the left because we've got the columns in the rollup in the same order as they are in Excel. What I mean by that is if I pull up the field list, it's order year month first and then online order flag. If we swap these in the pivot table, we get the online order flag first and then the order year month. So we only get the subtotals for the online order flag. We'll get this subtotal, we'll get this subtotal, and then the grand total at the end. So in pivot tables, the order that you put the columns in is significant. And it's exactly the same with the rollup in SQL. If we swap these around, our output also swaps in the same way that the Excel pivot table swaps. We're going to get subtotals for the online order flag and a grand total overall. So this is one bit where you need to be quite careful with a rollup. Make sure you're putting your columns in the right order. But other than that, it's just as simple as whacking a rollup onto a group by to get those subtotals. Note that the reason that I've whacked this in a separate video is because although this is available in SQL Server, and it is becoming more and more popular in other SQL flavors as well, this rollup option isn't in every SQL flavor. Group by will be in every SQL flavor, but rollup isn't necessarily in every SQL flavor. If you're using SQL Server, then yeah, of course you can use it. But if you're not using Microsoft SQL Server, double check the documentation for the group by statement to see if you will have access to the rollup function or the rollup modifier in your SQL flavor. To wrap up, we've seen that we can add subtotals and grand totals to our group by statements just by adding rollup and brackets around the columns. And when we use the rollup, we don't have to have an order by. It's probably a good idea to include one anyway, but we don't have to have one. When we use rollup, the order that we put the columns in is really important. It's going to treat the columns and the subtotals in the same way that an Excel pivot table would treat those columns. It's only going to produce subtotals for the same ones that the Excel pivot table would produce subtotals for. We've only used 2 columns here, but we can use as many columns as we like in the rollup. I hope you found this useful, and we'll catch you in the next one.